Good afternoon, everyone here in California. My name is Thomas Smith. I am the Australian, New Zealand, and South African wine buyer for K&L Wine Merchants. Super excited to be here on our Instagram live page today. And what we're going to be doing today is we have a super special tasting in which we have invited Anna Flowerday from Te Whare Ra to come join us, taste through some of the wines, and talk about what's going on in Marlborough today. We're holding off for just 1 second until we can get Anna on with us. Give me 1 second. Hey!
Hey.
How you doing?
How's it going?
Still with me?
Yep, I'm with you. Yep.
Beautiful. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, no. Sorry. Thank you so much for being here this morning. This afternoon for us, this morning for you. So welcome. We're here to taste through a couple of wines today and talk about your guys' winery based out of Renwick in Marlborough. We've got the 2019 Sauv Blanc, the 2019 Medium Dry Riesling, loosely referred to as the M, and the 2017 Pinot Noir as well. But I want to start by turning it over to you and asking you to talk a little bit about TWR, or Te Whare Ra, as it is pronounced. Try my best here. Tell me a little bit about the winery for those of our customers who aren't already immediately familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. No worries. So technically we're the oldest little winery in Marlborough. And I say that because obviously a few of our neighbours got to kind of global domination kind of size, which is all good, but not really our jam. So yeah, oldest small winery. Technically it was the second winery started in Marlborough. The original vineyard was planted in 1979 and we still have those vines, which is pretty cool. So oldest vines in the region. So yeah, Jason and I kind of came on the scene here. Well, we bought the property about 17 years ago. And by way of our backstory, we're both winemakers and we both grew up with family vineyards. But I'm from the West Island, as I like to say to Kiwis. Obviously, that big one slightly to the west of New Zealand. And Jason's from Marlborough. So we both grew up in wine-growing regions, but are from grape-growing or wine-growing families, not big wine dynasties or anything like that. And just got to the stage where we really wanted to do our own thing. We're kind of umming and ahhing about where that was going to be. And when we heard this place was for sale, we just loved everything about it. It was this small little old vineyard, no Sauvignon Blanc, you know, a little bit quirky, needed a bit of TLC to kind of bring it back to life again. And I guess that's everything we loved about it, was sort of everything else that everyone thought was a bit weird. You know, they were like, oh, but it's got no Sav and it's an old vineyard and it's quite small. And we're like, yep, that ticks all the boxes for us. So, yeah, we took it on and I guess I've spent the last kind of 17 years trying to bring it back to life again. So,
yeah, I feel like in that time, you guys have done an incredible job at building what's really almost a global footprint for your wines. How many different countries are you available in right now?
15 as of this week.
Yikes, crazy.
Yeah,
and what's really interesting to me is that you guys are this little tiny operation in the heart of the Loire Valley for the most part. And beyond you, there is this ocean of Sauvignon Blanc being produced in Marlborough today. I mean, you find it in any major grocery store across the United States, to be absolutely sure. But a lot of those wines kind of range between the $7 and $12 US price points, and they're great and they're fine. I'm curious your take on how you contrast what you are doing as opposed to what the rest of Marlborough is doing. What makes you guys different from everybody else?
Yeah, I guess, well, for starters, it's a wine company run by two winemakers, which is probably a different agenda sometimes. Than, you know, there is a lot of Marlborough now in international ownership. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's just a different agenda. I mean, it's in some ways you think it's quite exciting. It's made this place what it is today, that there's I don't know, 20 different nationalities at least kind of involved here. And so it's a real melting pot of different things and different agendas. Do you know what I mean? I guess we just really want to I want to make great wine. I want to make Sauvignon Blanc that really restores people's faith in why all of this happened, and, you know, but also that you can taste the difference, so that, you know, for your sort of average Sauvignon Blanc drinker, or people that think, oh, perhaps I'm going to, you know, I sort of think I understand Sauvignon Blanc, I'm going to, you know, move on to something else. I would urge you to please stay with us. And yeah, I just think it's a variety that if you do give it a bit of extra care and attention, will kind of reward you in spades. And I think really the key difference for me is just a cropping level thing. And it's not something that's talked about that often with Sauvignon Blanc, because it is pretty crop flexible. You know, it's not like Pinot. It's not this finicky, temperamental thing that if you step over the line, everything's going to come apart and really show you up. It's, you know, Sauvignon, and especially there's really different soil types in Marlborough. You know, we only talk about kind of 3 main sub-regions at the moment, but I think we could definitely get to the point where we're talking about 6 or 7 or something like that. You know, there's really different soil types, and they give you quite different flavour profiles, and they can also crop at different levels. But I guess for me, I want to make Sauvignon Blanc that's ripe, that's fleshy, that's got real fruit weight, that you know, acidity is a big part of the variety, but it can be sometimes a little bit lean and sometimes, you know, bordering on a little bit aggressive for some people. I mean, again, some people love that. That's the zing. They feel like they can taste, you know, the energy of New Zealand and all that kind of thing in the wines. But for me, wine's meant to be delicious. That's its main purpose. And that's what I want. I want Sauvignon Blanc that people have drunk half a bottle of it before they've even noticed is our whole agenda. So, but yeah, it was a bit of an interesting one, because when we, like I said, when we took over the vineyard, there was actually no Sauvignon Blanc planted here at all, not a single vine. And yet we're in this region that's famous for Sauvignon. So we thought, well, we've got this clean slate to do whatever we want with Sauvignon Blanc, you know, what's going to be our take on it. And for us, we really like, you know, harnessing the differences between a couple of those sub-regions for the style that we like making. But again, it is about careful site selection, thoughtful farming, you know, careful winemaking, just to really coax the best out of it. And also means we can make the wines with minimal intervention. So, and that's a real focus as well. Is like, if you do all those other steps on the way in, right, it means that we're not then having to put the wines through lots of other processes in the winery, and, you know, they're not fined, they're not, you know, there's not excessive kind of processing and things like that, because we've treated them really gently, you know, on the way in.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I love about your guys' approach in particular. Like, it's so refreshing to hear you talk about sub-regionality, talking about soil types, about attentive farming, because for so many people that I meet on a daily basis, it's just Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc is one thing. And that's crazy to me, just because Sauvignon Blanc is one of the most site expressive varieties that's out there. I had a question on Wine Reddit a couple of days ago, and someone was looking for a wine recommendation for Sauvignon Blanc from Marlborough, but something a little bit higher end. And someone said, oh, try Sancerre. That's the same thing. Like, those couldn't be more different from one another. And it's really, I love having this conversation where people who are really familiar with the landscape can really talk about their expertise between how sites reflect in the ultimate wines, and how things like soil type, how vintage affect the wines that they're making. I think that's what a lot of people who are looking for great wines, that's what they want to know about. And that's kind of the experience that they want to have. Wine that ultimately connects back to a place. And it's so amazing to hear you talk about that. That makes me really happy.
I like making you happy, mate.
So let's just get into it. I've got the wines here. I don't know if you have the wines there or if I'm going solo. Regardless. Beautiful. Same. So we're going to start a little bit with the 2019 Sauvignon Blanc from TWR. You want to add a little, start with what the vintage was like in 2019?
Yeah, absolutely. So 2019 was what was considered to be actually a drought year here in Marlborough. super dry and quite a hot summer as well, and quite challenging for some sites. Like, it's interesting because everyone thinks New Zealand gets, you know, a lot of rainfall and it's this big green country and everything's very lush and green, but really the east coast of both islands is quite dry. We're effectively in a bit of a rain shadow, and that was really exacerbated in 2019. Some sites experienced like quite significant drought, and without getting too technical, there's different kind of water licenses in Marlborough for where you can get your water for irrigation from if you do need it or want to use it for your site. And some of those people actually got their water shut off because our river levels got so low and the aquifers and that kind of thing, that some sites were, had their normal water shut off in 19 and had to deal with trucking water in and that kind of thing, which, as you can imagine, is a pretty pricey exercise. So for me, just, it's probably characterized by that really warm, hot summer, quite low crops. The flowering that we had in 19, there was a bit of rain during that earlier part of spring and summer, and that really knocked the crops back. So that's probably a big thing, I think, for 19. We had, not just with Sauvignon, but on the home vineyard, I think we had our smallest crops we've ever had in 19. So, but the wines, really show that. They're really concentrated, they're really fleshy. They're into that riper spectrum that you don't sometimes see. There's a bit of a stone fruity kind of, almost like for me, a nectarine kind of character and things like that, whereas often we'd be operating in that tropical citrus kind of spectrum. Mm-hmm. I quite like it when you see that stone fruit characteristic. So it was the earliest vintage we've ever had as well, because of low crops, warm summer. We had fruit coming into the winery on the 1st of March, which was a bit challenging because I think we only had our last Pinots going out on like the 28th of February. So we're like, okay, so we're done with that, and now we're smack into this one. Everyone had to get up to speed pretty quickly. But really lovely summer, no sort of challenging conditions over vintage. It was more just managing, as I said, that drought stress for some people, and I think it's picking decisions for Sauvignon are quite important. It's what kind of flavour profile are you looking for, acidity, what do you want? It was something that needed a bit of thoughtfulness with that. But I think they're amazing wines, and I think for us, what we're really trying to do with Sauvignon, and the reason for that focus and that kind of thoughtfulness too, is that the wines have got longevity in the bottle. I really want to show people that well-made New Zealand Sauvignon has definitely got ageability and longevity. And the fact that this is a 19, I'd actually, I'd rather be looking at this now than I would a 20, because I think 20s are still, really youthful and that kind of thing. But I kind of like the way that the 19s kind of flesh out, and you see a little bit of a hint of some of those secondary characters. And I think the barrel ferment is an important thing for us to have that component in the blend. It just gives the wine really nice texture and interest. And like I said, I want to make wines that you've drunk half a bottle before you've even noticed.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that warm summer. It feels like the sugar probably came on really quick in this wine, because it has a lot of ripeness for TWR, but it's still is interesting to hear you say that you picked it as early as you've ever picked it, because it still has that really, not bracing, but that acidity really cuts through a lot of the weight on that fruit and kind of brings it back into this beautiful balance. I think this is a super, super unique wine for you guys. I love it. I think it's awesome. So for this particular wine, you mentioned earlier that the original vineyard, your home vineyard, which we loosely refer to as V5182, didn't have any Sauvignon Blanc in it originally. Now, the sources from this wine come from a couple of different places. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's still kind of in the family, pretty much. So we did, when we took over, we did plant some Sauvignon Blanc, but although we're in the Whare Ra, we're sort of technically more southern valleys by soil type, which is characterised by the kind of clay soils on the southern side of the Whare Ra and up all the little side valleys there, like the Brancott, the Marker, Fairhall. You sometimes see those. You will see some of those names starting to be used on some labels. So yeah, we really like that clay aspect because it gives it really fleshy, textural kind of Sauvignon Blanc. Quite low cropping. I mean, on the home block, we crop the Sauvignon Blanc at more like a Pinot cropping level, because again, I really want that ripe aspect. I want real fruit weight for this parcel. So But like I said, yeah, it's still kind of in the family. So the main proportion of the blend, about 75%, comes from the Awa. So for people who haven't been to Marlborough before, basically Marlborough is two big river valleys that run parallel to each other in this direction. So you've got the Whare Ra Valley here, further to the north, ripens earlier, more tropical kind of spectrum. So that's where we are, and where the winery is. If this was the sea out here, you've kind of got, Te Whare Ra's in the kind of middle of the Whare Ra. And then further to the south, on the other side of the Wither Hills and the Blerick Range, you've got the Awa. And we really love that part of Marlborough for Sauvignon Blanc, because it produces kind of more citrusy, more restrained, kind of like dialed back. You know, I've often described it as like acoustic Sauvignon Blanc. It's like unplugged. There's no loud, shouty kind of electric guitar Sauvignon Blanc. It's kind of, this more restrained, elegant style, but has really lovely ripe acid. And I'm a total acid hound. I kind of love acidity, I think, because I love Riesling so much. And we really like that part of the Awa. So because it ripens more slowly out there, and at kind of cooler temperatures, you get, a really lovely, important characteristic. So we've got two growers out there. One is my father-in-law. Still keeping it Flowerday. And then the other one is another long-term grower we've had for a long time, property called Trelawn, which they're both kind of in the middle of the Awa, which Jason and I prefer. I think that's kind of the A-list spot out there. And then the two Whare Ra components, which make up 25% of the blend, is our home vineyard, and then my brother-in-law. So, cool. Like I said, kind of keeping it in the family as much as possible. But it's one wine that we make that's always been a blend. I think for what we were kind of shooting for with our classic Marlborough, we really like harnessing those Awa Whare Ra differences. And so it's one that has always been a blend of us and a couple of growers. Yeah.
Beautiful. Heard you mention Riesling. We have that coming up next in the lineup. One last thing before we leave Sauvignon Blanc behind. This is more or less your flagship wine. This is the wine that if you're going to try one thing after this tasting, check out the Sauvignon Blanc. It's pretty darn spectacular for the uninitiated. And even for those of us who have had it a bunch of times, it's still delicious. Let's move on to the Riesling, shall we?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's do that. Sorry, I'll just pardon the pouring noise.
Yeah, I was on a forum the other day, and this was saying, oh, the wine of this month is going to be Riesling from New Zealand. And there were like 50 messages from people saying, where do I find this? I can't buy this anywhere. Where do I get Riesling from New Zealand? To an extent, this still feels a little niche. It feels a little bit esoteric, but please check these wines out. Marlborough Riesling is utterly phenomenal. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you made this wine in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. So totally agree with the sentiments there, mate. I think Riesling rocks. It's like my favorite white grape on this earth. And I think it is the unsung hero of the South Island in general. Do you know what I mean? But the thing is like you were saying, it's so often people just haven't seen it because obviously it's exported in smaller quantities. It's not on people's radar that New Zealand even makes Riesling. And when they come here, they're just like, oh my God, why did no one tell me about this? It's freaking amazing. So I'm trying really hard because we're on Instagram too not to swear. So apologies in advance if I accidentally do, because people who know me well know that that's kind of part of the thing. But
you're in good
yeah, so we love Riesling. About 25% of the property at Te Whare Ra is planted to Riesling, and we've got two different plantings. And interestingly, quite a significant difference in age. And we just noticed that the flavour profiles kind of each suited different styles. So the one you've got now is our Riesling M, which stands for medium dry. And that is off our younger planting of Riesling. So those are vines that Jason and I planted when we took over. We sort of reconciled some parts of the old vineyard, some parts we kept and some parts we replaced. And we did have some Semillon that we pulled out because it was unfortunately really virus. And it was a gap right next to our old Riesling. We're like, okay, well, let's plant some more Riesling. We love it. And, it's always been a part of the winery's history. And yeah, like I said, I think the best New Zealand Rieslings are equal to the best from anywhere. There's some really exciting Riesling in the South Island. So what we were shooting for with this style is our version of a perfect medium dry. So really looking for that lovely tension between the sweetness and the acidity. And this block just does this for us so well. You get this really exuberant kind of citrus, like mandarin, pink grapefruit kind of thing. Sometimes a bit of stone fruit pushing into like white peach kind of characteristics. But then the acid on this block is really chalky. And so it works really well for kind of counterbalancing that sweetness. And it's always interesting when we had this at a consumer tasting or in cellar door or something like that, because you get all the people like, oh, I don't like sweet wine. Okay, cool. No worries. Let's see how we go. So we taste the Sauvignon and they love that. And then we taste the dry Riesling and they love that too. And then they taste this and they're like, oh my God, I love that. That's delicious. And I'm like, yeah, if I told you that was a Riesling with, you know, any amount of RS, you wouldn't have even tasted it. But people, I think, need to get over that and realize it's about balance. Don't ask me the number, you know, and it's not about that. It's just about deliciousness. That's its main function. And I feel like this style has that in spades. It's such a crowd pleaser. It's one that changes people's mindset around. I think a lot of people, you know, especially a wee bit older, like my parents' generation, are kind of emotionally scarred by bad Riesling. I'm a bit like that with kind of cheap tequila. It's like off my drinking repertoire forever, but I've realized that I need to change it and need to keep an open mind. And I've now, you know, kind of come back in and realized I need to go a bit higher end. I was probably, you know, drinking the wrong stuff at university. But yeah, this style of Riesling I absolutely love. You get, like I said, that real luscious sweetness and everything up front, but then the acid kicks in. It finishes quite dry, finishes quite refreshing, super moorish. I'd call this dangerously drinkable.
Yeah. And for me, the sweetness level, to make a comparison, it really falls, you know, Spätlese from Germany can be a pretty wide spread between like very, very sweet, almost like, why am I saying Spätlese? Cabinet can almost be Spätlese, but it can also be like Feinharb or close to dry. This feels in the cabinet area for me, probably a little bit leaning on the dry side, but like some of the best Donhoff cabinets out there, which I think this absolutely stands up to, are like absolute favorites of mine. The sweetness just isn't dialed in. And speaking of that, I was curious about how this is made. Do you guys do the dry and the sweet in separate passes, or are they individual blocks that you guys harvest separately?
So they're individual blocks that we harvest separately. And interestingly, it just is such different flavor profiles off the two blocks. I wouldn't have really believed it until I'd seen it side by side, you know, because I came to wine from the science geek kind of side of things, how I ended up here. And so I always like having the scientific understanding of why something is. I'm kind of just like, okay, I get it, but I need to know. And I like experimenting. I like doing trials. And so, yeah, for us, it's just, I don't know if it'll always be that way, but the old vineyard just has this much more, more that kaffir lime, ripe lemon kind of spectrum, and the acid's got really good minerality, so it really suits a dry. We do pick that slightly riper because obviously, you know, we want that riper spectrum, and that especially for a dry, there's nowhere to hide with the acidity, so it has to be in a really ripe, mouth-watering kind of spectrum. Whereas this one, we do pick it a little bit earlier, but no, they are two distinct blocks. So the D that we make that people would be perhaps familiar with too if they've had our wines before, that's all off the old vines that were planted in 79. And the M is always off the younger block because they just have two distinctly different flavor profiles. And when we first noticed that, we're like, that is the universe just telling us we need to make two kinds of Riesling, sometimes three if we chuck the Noble in as well. So yeah, if we were the size of a couple of our neighbors, I'd probably make 15 different Rieslings. But I guess two definitively different ones, you know, and because the interesting thing about the old world, you know, sweetness classifications, because we don't have those. So it was like, okay, what are you going to name it? Where do you know, we just thought D&M made a lot more sense than old block, young block, or naming after one of our kids or something. It just added to the general confusion around Riesling. Because I think that's often where people come unstuck with that and why they're a bit scared of it or a bit gun shy is because they know it can be this and they know it can be that and they kind of know what they like. But if it just says Riesling on the label, you know, and it's not a wine they've had before, or there's no one in the store to help them, or they'll just choose something else. And I think that's a terrible crime. And I'm on a one-woman crusade to get more people drinking Riesling. So, But yeah, it is. I'd look out for New Zealand Riesling wherever you can find it. Obviously, not a lot goes to the States, but yeah, super grateful of you guys to actually take our whole range. I mean, we're all about showing people the kind of depth and diversity of what New Zealand can do. And yet if people can't try the wine, they can't, you know, how are they ever going to know? So it's, yeah, it's thumbs up to KNL for actually, you know, stumping up and showing people that.
So that leads me to one more Riesling question before we get on to the Pinot. So in addition to the 3 Rieslings that you guys make, the dry, the sweet, and the noble, you guys are also making Pinot Gris. You guys are also making Gewürztraminer. And you have Toru, which is your 3-blend wine that's, spoiler alert, is going out in our club for the premium club next month. My question is, everything here seems very Alsatian inspired. Is that deliberate? Was that something that was inherited from the vineyard that you guys bought, or was that a very deliberate choice for you from that side of your winemaking portfolio? To what extent does Alsatian sit in the back, Alsace sit in the back of your head when you're making wine?
Yeah, definitely, mate. I think it's probably a 50-50 of both of those. Obviously, the plantings, you know, we had the old Riesling and the old Gewürz, and we knew the property's history with those, and we're quite excited about that. We're like obsessed with Riesling because we've been working in Clare for 4 years before we moved to Marlborough. Yeah, and then I think it is a definite benchmark for us. I think just Alsatian styles, and with the climate and the kind of structure of those wines and the generosity of them, but also still retaining that purity, is probably quite akin to the growing conditions that we have in Marlborough. So for us, that's wines I definitely want our wines to stack up against, without a doubt. I mean, Gewürztraminer is an interesting one because it's kind of the thing that put Te Whare Ra on the map, you know, 30 years ago. We've got Gewürz geeks that's all they buy from us. They just come every year and buy their case of Gewürz, and you know, it's a tricky variety to grow. But we were so daunted about it when we took over the vineyard because we loved Gewürztraminer. We drank a lot of it, but neither of us had actually ever made one. So we've got a really good mate in Alsace, thankfully, Freddie from Paul Blanc, and I kind of emailed him at one stage. We sort of knew through a mutual friend, and I'd met him years and years ago at Vinexpo, and I was like, hi, I don't know if you remember me, but we're living in New Zealand now, and we've bought this old vineyard. What can you tell me about Gewürztraminer? What do I need to know? And the best advice I had from him for the straight Gewürztraminer anyway was like, when you think it's ready, basically leave it for another week and then it's ready. I was like, okay, cool. Because I think it's it's almost like with those varieties, they do have that crossover, I think, because of the pinky brown skins. You know, you kind of got to think about them a little bit like a red wine. But then, yeah, Toru definitely was Alsatian inspired. That is, you know, those field blend wines we'd had were what made us want to make Toru. We just thought it was super delicious, interesting. You know, no one in New Zealand's doing anything like that. Let's have a go. And then, you know, 14 years later, it's a much loved kind of part of our lineup. But that's very much where the inspiration came from. So yeah, it's probably a little bit of both. I think probably 70% Alsace nod and 30% because of what was planted. So
cool. So without further ado, let's move on to the 17 Pinot Noir.
Yeah.
Where the Sauvignon Blanc, you mentioned the sources for this wine all come from family or people who are closest family. A little bit different with the Pinot Noir, because this actually comes from some of the most heavy-hitting vineyards in all of Marlborough for Pinot Noir, right?
Yeah.
What are the sources for the 17 Pinot?
So the 17 Pinot is partly off the home vineyard, but then the other two source blocks are owned by the Geeson family, one being Ridge, which is a younger Pinot close kind of vineyard that they have over kind of heading towards Fairhall, and then Claven, which is a bit of a name drop. For those of people who know New Zealand Pinot, that Pinot vineyard was a game changer for Marlborough and Pinot. It was the first Pinot Noir, you know, kind of block that had been purpose done. It was close planted. It was up the southern valleys on the clays where no one had really, you know, planted up that far before. And when people first started seeing the quality off that vineyard, I think it changed people's mindset around what was possible in Marlborough with Pinot. So we're very fortunate to be able to have access to that fruit. So all three vineyards are certified organic. So yeah, it's a combo of those three sites, Te Whare Ra, Ridge and Claven.
Yeah, and as I recall, I believe only you and Fromm are the only people who have access to Claven fruit other than Gießen itself. So it's very, very limited, highly in demand, and you are one of the chosen few who gets the fruit off that vineyard. Tell me about 17.
17 was a bit of an interesting vintage because it was quite a nice sort of warm summer and not too hot. 16 was probably, or 15 was a bit like 19, super dry, super hot. 16 has probably been a bit more like 20, and 17 was not super early, just kind of ticking along quite nicely, quite a nice even summer. But the challenge was 17 as an overall vintage from Marlborough was there was a lot of rain at the end. We got a couple of cyclonic kind of events that came down across the South Island and dumped huge amounts of rain on Marlborough at the end. But fortunately, with being kind of lower cropping and also, I guess, focusing on quite a few early varietals, we had everything in before any of that happened. So I think it's a bit of an interesting one because a lot of kind of things went out there that like, oh, 17, some of the wines weren't that great and weren't that, were a bit challenged. And it's like, well, just, I think for those things, it's people can have totally different experiences. With us, and especially with farming organically, you always prepare for the apocalypse because you don't have a quick fix option if it all does turn to crap. So, everything that we're doing now throughout this whole part of the growing season from pruning onwards is preparing our vines that, we've got nice open canopies. We're not carrying a big crop, So, yeah, we really think 17, I think the wines are pretty exceptional. And we love, I think our Pinot style really suits releasing a little bit later though, obviously because there's some 19s and stuff like that out already, but we found that for our sites that we work with, we're doing the wines a disservice by releasing them too early. So it's a bit of an investment, obviously, to have them in bottle and then stored for this period of time, but then I can release a wine like this, which 17's only just come out. You guys have just got it. We've only just released it here in New Zealand to show people what it's going to do when it starts to unfold and kind of flesh out a little bit. So
you guys also make a single vineyard Pinot Noir from the original vineyard property that you guys purchased back in 01. But this rendition of this Pinot Noir is definitely the best I have seen from you guys. This is phenomenal. Oh, man, that's so good.
We love Pinot, so I just love that shows in the wines. I think it is this winemaker obsessive grape, but I think if you treat it right, if you look after it, it can just reward you in spades. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this one is starting to do that now with just, showing me so much and just interesting stuff. That's what I'm into is I don't want big blockbuster Pinot. I don't think that's what Marlborough does. Marlborough Pinots have beautiful fragrance. They have multi-layers. We have great line and length. And again, just that thoughtful handling and the kind of, not intervening in the winemaking unless you absolutely have to kind of thing, but intervening when you need to preserve what you've worked so hard to grow is kind of what we're about.
Beautiful. All right, so we're getting to the point where we're going to start wrapping things up. Again, really awesome showing of wines for everyone who's out there watching. The 19 Sauvignon Blanc, the 19 Medium Sweet, and the 17 Pinot Noir. Thank you so much for being here. Do we want to do a quick lightning round on our way out real fast?
Sure.
Question. Don't think about it. Just answer.
Yeah. Good.
Here we go. Best wine you had this year?
Best one I had this year. Ooh. 98 Winery Shiraz.
Oof. Oh, that's a good name drop. One variety that you don't currently work with that you would love to work with?
Sparkling wine, actually.
Excellent.
I think it's another best kept secret.
Who is your winemaker crush?
Oh, that's a hard one. I'm going to say it's a local shout out. I'm going to say Claire Mulholland from Burn Cottage.
Excellent.
Love cool chick.
What is you guys keep cows on the property?
Mm-hmm.
Favorite cow?
Harry. Our red ginger boy. Yeah, he's called Harry because he's a bit handsome and he's a ginger. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Anna. This was a blast. If you're watching, try the wines. They're absolutely phenomenal. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thanks, mate. See ya.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.